So what's going on in Mike's world?
Just getting ready for the big email launch, which actually
All
by the
right.
time, if you do include this in the the episode, by the time this would air, then I believe it will have been released. So
Nice.
it's getting real.
Yeah. Gotta love that. I hate the time between the moment that you finish a product and typically, and it sounds like you guys do this the same way. Typically, at least for me, like I finish something and then it's like a couple weeks later that you'll actually release it. It's like I hate that 2 week period. Absolutely hate it. Because I start wondering, it's like, okay, did I get everything included? What did I get it all buttoned up the right way? What if it doesn't go out the way I want it to? I hate it.
Oh, there's been stuff already since I finished it that things have changed and I've had to go back and fix because like the app is no longer called the same thing or they updated their icon.
Right.
So it is what it is. I just want nothing else to change until we actually can launch it. But
Yeah.
I am super excited about this launch. I've mentioned a little bit about the process, I think, in previous podcast episodes where like we've been doing interviews and working closely with people to solve their specific pain points regarding email.
Right.
And we've gotten some amazing testimonials back from people who are like, "Oh my gosh, this has changed my life." And it's like, we just helped you fix what you said was broken. Like, we're glad we could help, but you did the work.
Right. You did everything.
But yeah, it feels really good to be able to help people in that way though. One lady's saying, I used to have like 1,700 messages and I was spending literally my entire day dealing with email. And now everybody in my organization got all stressed out the other day when we had a day-long meeting, but I was on top of everything and everybody was like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
She's like, well, I went through this course.
Go do this.
Changed my life. And I'm like, well, awesome.
That's always a good feeling. I get that a number of times with the working with the OmniFocus course, and it's helpful to see. Obviously, you get the haters out that come out of that, but it's always exciting to see when people get really interested and it helps in a big way. So it's like, yes, that's why I do this. This is one of the things I was trying to figure out is why am I doing my online business? That right there. That's it. You got it. So as long as it's able to help people make a big change in some form in their life, awesome. That's exactly why I continue doing these things. And it sounds like you kind of operate on the same pattern there. It's like, okay, I made this thing and I let people go see it, and now they're really excited about it, and it made a big impact. Yes, 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 yes. Now I want to do more.
Exactly. I mean, it's going to be probably the financial success is almost secondary,
Right.
at that point because it just feels so good to be able to help people solve their problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially regarding email. So transition, we got an email.
Yes.
You want to talk about this one? This email was awesome.
Yeah, and I don't get a lot like most of the emails I get on the Bookworm contact form. So just so everybody knows, those go to me. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's the way it is now that we're talking about email. But this one in particular stood out, and it's from Amber, and it's one that I don't, just in my general online business and working world, I don't get emails of this length and of this detail very often, but when I do, they're always very interesting and I want to I want to share them with the world. But Amber hasn't given me any permissions whatsoever on this. So, if you're listening to this, Amber, thank you for sending this. I haven't replied to you yet. I'm sorry. We're going to talk about it now. So, what this email is a lady by the name of Amber. She is a stay-at-home mom homeschooling with 5 kids, and her husband introduced her to this podcast, and they have been listening. They're loyal listeners, and it sounds like they have created their own little book club within their family, and it's kind of exciting to see how something that little old us put together just to read books and talk about it is starting to inspire, in this case, a stay-at-home mom with her kids to begin reading books more often. So I think that's pretty exciting. I like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. You go, Amber. And that's exactly why we started this podcast. At least my motivation for starting it was that we were going to go through this. We were going to record these conversations, put them up on the internet, and maybe other people could benefit from them. But at the very least, I was going to benefit from them
Yes.
because I'm synthesizing the information and I'm applying it to my life. So, we're able to help people do that. That's awesome. But yeah, what I really like about that email is that Amber took the idea and she modified it slightly and made it fit for her, which is really the ideal way to approach anything. And that's the way that we approach every single one of these books, I think, is like, we're going to take a look at this information. We're going to take a look. Some of them have prescriptive formulas where you do this and you get this. But for the most part, it's like, what is the thing in here that I can really latch onto? I'm not going to try and change my entire life every single time I read one of these books, but I'm going to grab a few things that I can implement, small changes, which will produce compound results in the long run.
And I really love that, because the thing that they've picked up on here is that you and I alternate picking books. So I love this. Her husband picked their first book. It sounds like they picked Essentialism as the first, and then they're alternating.
Good choice.
I know. They're alternating who is picking which book comes next. So they're alternating and trading turns within the family as to who's is coming next. So I like it. I'm a big fan. I mentioned this to my wife, and she's like, I don't see how people have the energy or the strength to do this as a family. I don't think I could do that. It's like, well, I get it, but at the same time, it sounded like they were planning on this taking multiple months per book, if I read this correctly. So
right.
It doesn't have to be every 2 weeks like what we do. We're a bit crazy in that. That's why it's called Bookworm. It's, we go through a lot of books.
Right. We are crazy.
Ours is official. Yours is not. So I was a big fan. That's why I wanted to share it, because it's one of those things that, like we were talking about earlier, you hear about these, and it's the part that gets us pretty excited about what we're doing and has us keep doing it. So it's the motivating stuff, the feedback that we get from people. So it was exciting. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Amber. We really appreciate it.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, it's one of the things I had from last time that I wanted to do for this time around is making sure that I understand my personal why of my online business, because I do a lot of things online. Like we were talking likely before, depending on where we cut this, before the show started, I've been working on a custom WordPress theme for a client. So there's just a lot of code and things I'm doing there. Anyway, I understand why I build websites for people, but I don't always have the why behind why I write for the blog or why I give away scripts or build working with OmniFocus. I don't always have a defined rationale for why I'm doing that. And I think what I've come to on this, Mike, and all of the listeners out there, is my ultimate purpose behind that is simply to help people get better at the productivity tools that exist out there. And that manifests itself through seeing how people are using the stuff that I've created or how they are implementing the little bits each day. So those are the things that get me really excited, and that's why I continue doing that. So it's kind of self-serving, I guess, but at the same time, it's a way to help a lot of people with very little into it, if that makes sense.
Yep. My pastor told me one time that you need to do what brings you life. And I think that what you're saying is that what brings you life is seeing how people implement this stuff and the kind of results that they get from it.
I think so, yeah.
And this, without going too deep down a deep work rabbit hole, this why is different than things that you like doing. It kind of comes back to the whole idea of passion, which Cal Newport talks about, and how follow your passion is really bad advice because most people think that's do what you really like to do. But really it's when you get done and you look at something, do you feel satisfied? Do you feel rewarded intrinsically just by the fact that you've done this thing? Because the word passion, really what it means is to suffer. So what is it that you're willing to suffer through to see come about? What vision are you willing to suffer through in order to see it materialize? And so I kind of took that approach for my follow-up item here, which you put, what is the why behind all the things? I'm
Well,
not going to go
that's how
into,
you explained it in the last show. I was like, well,
it's true.
I don't know how to write this down for follow-up because you said you wanted to find the why behind all the things, and I liked the way you said that. So I figured I would put it in exactly like that and see what you did with it.
Yep. Well, I'll give you the too long didn't read version, I guess, without going into all the things. But really what I did is I took a look at all of my commitments and everything that I've said yes to, kind of through the lens of, if I hadn't already said yes to this thing, would I say yes to it right now? And any of the things that weren't a resounding yes are either gone or on the chopping block, because really what it forced me to do was to connect back to the why. When I first agreed to do this specific thing, why did I say that I wanted to do this? So one of the things, I'll just give you one of the things that came from this, I guess, looking back at my work with Asian efficiency and everything that I've been doing recently with this email video course in particular, I've really kind of zeroed in on my why in that aspect, because I really feel like through developing these videos, I've kind of found my sweet spot in terms of product development. I mentioned that I really enjoy helping people really make the most of what they've been given, their time, their talent, their ability, the tools that they have at their disposal, how to use them more effectively so that you can free up more time for the things that are really important. Like, I really like seeing the results of that. And through the whole development process for this particular product, where we're testing out these solutions that we're crafting with the people who had the problems in the first place, I'm really discovering that this particular video format really is something that I'm pretty good at. And it's not that I really enjoy doing it or even that it's really easy to do, but I can see the big picture and I can see how these things come together. And so, like, my why in terms of what I do with Asian efficiency is become a little bit more clear, because I now have a specific format for how I best communicate these solutions. Does that make sense?
It does to me, yeah, because
Okay.
I've kind of made some of that same shift. I've done a lot of writing in the productivity space, and what I've just figured out, Mike, is I'm kind of like you in the video format, like the screencasting type thing, put together a keynote and record it. That type of scenario, at least for me, I feel like I can convey my ideas better that way.
Exactly. Yep. Right. So I've kind of nailed down, because my whole journey, started when I wasn't a writer, and then I started writing. And then I wasn't a podcaster and I started podcasting. So
Yep.
I was not a video producer, but really that is the thing where when I get done with something and other people have verified this, is like, whoa, this is high quality. This is really good. This really helps me. And so I feel like I've got just a little bit more focus on what my direction, like what the end result is supposed to look like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what ultimately leads your personal business along with the business of Asian efficiency to become better, because you figure out how and why you do things. That's what Simon Sinek was getting at, is if you understand your why, that eventually impacts your products and you end up with better products in the end. And your how and what of everything just adds up a lot better. So I think once you get the why and you understand your methods behind that why, it can have a big impact on your overall business strategy, which is kind of what our book for today is about, is how do you go about building that business and continue to grow it. And I think we both likely had some opposing views of the book within ourselves. At least I did. It's like I both loved it and hated it at the same time. Anyway, The Innovator's Dilemma is what I'm talking about, and this was my choice, and this is by Clay Christensen. And the ultimate reason that I picked this is that one of the business type things that I do is it's kind of like a business garden is what some of us call it, who work together on this. But ultimately, some of the stuff that I do as a business is I hunt down new technologies and I turn it into a business in itself, and then we turn around and license or sell that to a larger corporation or something. And I knew that there's a lot of rationale on how you go about picking new technology to turn into a business. And I know the way I just described that is very vague. It's very nebulous, hard to understand. It's very hard to explain until you sit down and talk through it in detail. And in order for it to be successful, there's a lot of things I'm not going to say. So it's just the way it works. But I knew that the Innovator's Dilemma talked a lot about how new technology can impact existing companies. And I was very curious as to what Clayton talked about in the rationale behind those two. And this book has been a bestseller for quite a while. And to me, it seemed like one that would really change the way that I go about selecting new technology to turn into business. And that's partly why I wanted to pick it, just because I was looking for a little bit of guidance in how that comes about. Not to have another philosophical rationale behind a book, Mike, but it's just kind of my thought process. So there it goes. Was this one on your list beforehand, or was this one I introduced to you?
No, this is definitely one that you introduced to me. And actually, this is one that I almost gave up on. I almost texted you like halfway through that first section.
Yep.
I was like, Joe, I just can't do this.
Yep. I completely understand.
it starts off, well, first of all, I went and ordered it off of Amazon. And when I searched for it, it said there's a newer version available. So I click on the newer version.
Yep.
And I ordered the newer version from Amazon. And it comes, and the newer version is copyright 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yours is the same way?
I'm checking it to see which one I grabbed. I thought I had the newer one. Yes, 2000.
Okay, so my initial thought was maybe they sent me the older version.
Mm-hmm.
And because with updated examples, this is probably a totally different book.
Yes.
He starts off the very first chapter, and really the one where he's trying to lay out all of the groundwork for all of his arguments going forward, is where he's talking about the disk drive industry. And it goes up until present day when he wrote it, which was 2000, which was over 15 years ago. So he's talking about in the future, flash storage is going to be maybe a disruptive technology. And I'm like, oh, yes, it
Flash
is
is old.
Yeah, but if you can get past that first section, it's a very I don't want to say interesting read, because when I read it, I felt like I was back in business school. Like, this is read to me like a textbook. But what I found is that while a lot of his language and I didn't really relate to, there were definitely a lot of things that he said that jumped out at me. And so he would go for pages and pages about disk drives, and then he would say one thing that really grabbed my attention, and it would spur other thoughts kind of based off of the concepts that he was teaching. So I put some of them in the show notes, which we can talk about. But you want to start? I know the first thing you put down was the sustaining and disruptive technologies.
Yeah, before you go there, I looked it up. It's the first half of the book. It's literally half the book that he takes to go through the disk drive industry, and then he also gets into excavators. So if you're familiar with dirt movers, I'm a farm boy, so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so track hoes, bulldozers, like that's the type of thing I immediately think of, but I understand that terminology doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But suffice it to say, machinery that moves dirt. And he talks about these in way more detail, I think, than is necessary. And I'm one that I like to read about. I will read peer-reviewed journal articles. Like I am weird in the fact that I like reading those. So I'm used to reading a lot of highly technical articles and text, and this is a lot like that, but it's so in-depth and so long and so continuous in a lot of that same topic that I'm just sitting here like, you got to be kidding me. Are you done with this yet? Can we go on to the next? And there was so much detail that he provided that I felt like was just completely unnecessary. And I understand he's trying to show every aspect of it so that you can get as much of a picture of this industry as you can. But I did not pick up history of disk drives. I picked up Innovator's Dilemma. Like, and I think I could explain to you every disk drive, the year, and the companies involved with it in way more detail than I ever need to be able to. So that part I'm with you. It about killed me going through that first half. But to your point, there were a lot of areas where you'd go through we're talking about Seagate and all the different drives that they came up with, the 5.25 inch, like all these things that he's talking about. And then he would try to summarize what happened. And it's like, okay, that summary I get. Is there a way to search and pull out all those summaries? Like, I really just wanted those bits, and they were only like a paragraph long. And you'd have 5 or 6 pages explaining the industry, and then a paragraph that summarized the part that you are actually interested in, it seemed like. At least that's my perspective on it, but I think we're belaboring it at this point.
Well, I actually related more to some of the historical examples that he had, because at least then it was kind of through the lens of this happened a long time ago and you probably aren't familiar with everything that happened, and this is why things happened. But the whole disk drive discussion at the front was kind of like, this is what's happening right now, and this is what maybe is happening behind the scenes right now. And because it's a technological discussion, it just seems totally out of place. And that's why I kind of think that if there was a 2015 or 2016 version of this book, he used different examples, it would be much more engaging, and I would have hooked onto it a lot sooner. But I got over that. And if you look at the sources, I mean, this thing is dense.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that he included in the chapters, he's written long papers on that specific thing. And that's why he's able to talk with such detail about any of these different industries. It was just hard for me to grasp onto the disk drive one in particular at the beginning. But the points that he made were really good. And I really do like the whole idea behind why do some companies grab on to this disruptive technology and why do some not. And actually the disk drive, the main thing I got from that whole disk drive discussion was that the firms that identified the disruptive technology were usually the ones who were established, but they were also the ones who didn't do anything with it. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
He's got 6 different steps that kind of goes through. Step 1, disruptive technologies are first developed within those established firms. Step 2, marketing personnel then sought reactions from their lead customers. And that's really where things start to fall apart, because those lead customers, they are not looking at it through a disruptive lens. But then step 3, established firms step up the pace of sustaining technological development. Step 4, new companies are formed. Markets for those disruptive technologies were found through trial and error. And that's where looking at how the users are using the technology comes in. Step 5, the entrants then moved upmarket. And then step 6, established firms belatedly jumped on the bandwagon to defend their customer base. This was really interesting. And he talked about a couple different examples, like the steel industry, where companies entered on the low end of the market and the established firms didn't even give them notice, because they're like, oh, you can have that part of the market. It's so unprofitable. We want nothing to do with that. And then from there, they were able to move up and capture the rest of the higher end market that those established firms were really coveting. And then eventually a lot of those established firms disappear.
Yeah, I think if you try to define what the dilemma itself is, and before we go too far, I should probably define sustaining versus disruptive tech. But the difference there is that a sustaining technology, if you think about, let's just use Apple as an example. Most people who are going to listen to this, it seems like, understand Apple. If you take like the iPhone, they every year come out with a new version of it. Well, that would be a sustaining technology. They're constantly iterating on an existing product. But if you take something like a disruptive technology, that would be, say, the iPhone when it was first introduced, because touchscreens and handheld phones and internet communications device, those types of things didn't exist. It wasn't possible for you to walk around with that. So in that particular case, the same iPhone was a disruptive technology. And that's part of what he's getting at here is when a new tech comes into a market, people don't always understand what its use is, and like the market may not exist for it. I think of like the iPad when it first came out. How many people said it's an iPhone on steroids? I said that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, it's just a big iPhone. Well, that's partly because no one understood how to use it, and the market for it was tiny in comparison to what it could be as we look at it today. And this is, I think, what we're getting at with if this was a newer book, you'd see some of those types of examples as opposed to, a 14-inch drive versus an 8-inch drive. Okay, why are we talking about mainframes? I don't get it. So, that it just makes it a bit of a challenge. But if you get the difference there between the sustaining, the iteration style changes and innovations versus a disruptive innovation that doesn't have a market, but that market builds over time. And the problem and the dilemma here is that an existing company tends to focus on building out sustaining technology because that's their current customer base. They know the market for it, and they're trying to meet that market and consistently make that market better. When you have a disruptive tech come along, the market is so small for it or non-existent, or you don't even know what it is, that there's no way a current company wants to try at that simply because there's no way it's going to meet their current customer and their current market, because it takes a lot more revenue to continue to help them grow. One of the things he brings up is that if you have, say, a $10 billion company, in order for them to have a 10% growth, they need to come up with $1 billion in new sales. Whereas if you have take it's a $10 million business, well, their 10% gross is $1 million in new business. Well, the difference between those two, the size of market and the size of customer that you're shooting for is drastically different, and the size of a new product is drastically different between those two. A bigger existing $10 billion company has zero interest in $1 million technology. They're looking for something way bigger than that. I'm rambling. Does this all make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And you brought up Apple, so let me extrapolate on that a little bit, because one of the things that I thought of, a more recent technology-based example based off of current events as of when we are recording this. I think it was maybe a week or two ago that BlackBerry officially announced that they are no longer making hardware.
Yeah.
Which basically is the death of research in motion as a company. So I dug this up. This is and I'll post this in the chat here so you can put it in the show notes. This is a blog post from 2010 from Research in Motion responding to Apple's distortion field. And this is a quote from the co-CEO. He says, "For those of us who live outside of Apple's distortion field, we know that 7-inch tablets will actually be a big portion of the market. And we know that Adobe Flash support actually matters to customers who want a real web experience. We also know that while Apple's attempt to control the ecosystem and maintain a closed platform may be good for Apple, developers want more options and customers want to fully access the overwhelming majority of websites that use Flash." And it goes on to cite that Research in Motion sold, and they had record shipments for 5 consecutive quarters, recently shared guidance of 13.8 to 14.4 million BlackBerry smartphones for the current quarter. Then they bash Apple for shipping 8.4 million devices in the prior quarter, and they say that was probably padded by unfulfilled Q3 customer demand and channel orders. And then the last sentence, "As usual, whether the subject is antennas, Flash, or shipments, there is more to the story, and sooner or later, even people inside the distortion field will begin to resent being told half a story." And I thought this was interesting because there was a quote in the book that triggered this thought pattern for me. He said, "Firms failed when a technological change destroyed the value of competencies previously cultivated and succeeded when new technologies enhanced them." And BlackBerry had a very established market, and they kind of built their whole business model on the fact that we have enterprise users who traditionally pay more for the technology, and they need a physical keyboard. And Apple basically said, "No, you don't need a physical keyboard. There's a better way to do that." And they had all of the data to support their position. This is a classic example of what I think Clayton Christensen is talking about in the Innovator's Dilemma, where They tested it with their users. Their users all said, oh no, we hate this. We need to be able to feel the keys. Well, that's great, but enterprise users aren't going to be the global smartphone market in the future. And Apple really, I mean, it's undeniable that they hit the nail on the head with the iPhone. It's the most successful product in the company history. And the company, I think, was recently named the most valuable company in the world. So whether you like Apple or not, you cannot dispute the fact that they embraced a disruptive technology. What is interesting to me, though, is what Apple does from here, because there are a lot of people who are looking at this through the classic management lens. They're saying, oh, well, the Apple Watch is a failure. They only sold so many units. But in their last keynote, they shared a statistic that said they are the number two in the list of most profitable watchmakers in the entire world, behind only Rolex, I believe. So from a disruptive technology perspective, they are successful, and that is the spin that they are putting on it. Now, whether they actually believe that internally, it kind of remains to be seen. But I think that's one of the things that Apple's been very good at, is even though they've grown as a company, they have maintained the ability to embrace these disruptive technologies. And it's interesting to see, like very recently, how Research in Motion was not able to do that. There's another article here, which I'll share via Skype. This is John Gruber's take on the BlackBerry article.
Oh yeah, I think I saw this. It was what 2008 that he shared this? Yeah, this is a long time ago.
Right, but then he linked to this recently with this quote right here. He said, BlackBerry was good at making computer-like gadgets. The iPhone was a gadget-like computer. If you could see that difference and had a sense for just how difficult it would be for BlackBerry to gain expertise in computing hardware and software, in particular creating a platform for apps, you could see just how much trouble they were in, even though they had a handful of go-go sales years ahead of them. Very, very interesting, very, very recent technological example. That's the, I guess, the 2016 version of the disk drive analysis. But
I think BlackBerry is one that follows a very common pattern, though, in this case, because I don't know how many businesses I've either consulted with or worked for, and whenever they want to come up with something new and something revolutionary, they poll their customers and let's figure out what do our customers want, and we'll take all the data from them and we'll make the perfect thing, the perfect widget of some kind. And this is a classic case. So BlackBerry went through and they polled all of their customers and they figured out everybody loves physical keyboards. Well, here's my question. In that particular case, that particular scenario, how on earth is a group of business phone users, how are they supposed to know that a touch screen, you can learn how to use it and it does just as well? Like, how are they even able to comprehend that? And I think that's where Apple stepped in and said, this is a better experience from a human user interface, a human interface type scenario. This is a better experience. You've never used it before. It'll be painful at first, but you'll understand it in the long run. Look at the iPhone 7 with them getting rid of the headphone jack. How many people are throwing a fit over that? Well, I honestly, I don't get it. I mean, so many of us use Bluetooth headphones anymore. I think a lot of us, if you're on the cutting edge of things like that, if you stop and look at how many times you actually use that jack, it's pretty rare. I had to plug in. Here's an example. So I'm still on a 6S currently, so I do not have a 7. But I plugged in a set of headphones to make a phone call. This is about a week ago. And I kept getting static from it. It just wasn't working out. So I eventually just, pulled out the headphones and used it as a headset. As a handheld in that case. And afterwards, I got to looking at it. I was like, man, that's really weird. I had so much like lint and stuff built up in that jack because it's never used that there's no way anything would work. So it was just a case of, well, I guess I don't actually use that. Even though I have it, I just don't use it as much as you would think. And I think, whenever Apple does things like that, like they get rid of the headphone jack, it makes a lot of people angry up front, but Apple is in the business of disruptive technology. That's what they do. They understand that if you just get caught in consistently making one thing a little bit better each time, that's not where things land in the long run. And if you look at that particular case, yes, it's disruptive to get rid of that jack. Is it technically a disruptive technology? Probably not. It probably falls into a sustaining world. But what might be disruptive is the secondary thing of that wireless chip that they put in it, because that could change the way that we have wireless devices to overcome the Bluetooth process. So that might be, maybe not in the realm of an iPhone, but in the realm of wireless connectivity. That wireless chip might be the thing that finally topples the Bluetooth world, because Bluetooth's been around for how long now? But
Mm-hmm.
that might be where that goes. And this is the thing that Apple's good at, is they're okay taking the risks and dealing with a little bit of heartache up front, because they know that they can introduce something and then let it grow over time, and they're okay with that. And this is a case where BlackBerry says, no, Flash is going to be a big thing, and everybody wants an actual keyboard. It's like, well, that's fine, but your days are numbered, because the rest of the world thinks differently. But they couldn't see it at the time because they were so focused on meeting their current customers. And that will almost always bite you if you're trying to do something revolutionary in your own industry.
Right. You are limited to your perspective is limited by your value network. And Clayton Christensen defines value network as the context within which a firm identifies and responds to customers' needs, solves problems, procures input, reacts to competitors, and strives for profit. And that's the interesting thing to me about Apple, is not that they are currently the big kid on the block, but how have they been able to maintain that? Everything Clayton Christensen talks about inside the book, the problems with the large organizations. Apple has to deal with those, but somehow they're still able to embrace those disruptive technologies. And I think it's probably a little bit too early to say that the Apple Watch or any particular product has really been a success or a failure since the iPhone, which really completely changed the company's trajectory historically. But it seems to me that they've somehow been able to navigate this where a lot of other firms have not. And there's example after example after example in this particular book. And it's because those established firms, they didn't fail to see the technology, but they failed to recognize its importance. I don't know what the secret is to always being able to correctly identify whether something is important. But I think that part of it is probably, instead of asking your current customers what their thoughts are on a particular technology, being able to see the larger picture, the larger market from the very low end to the very high end of all the potential users of this technology, really being able to identify from those people whether this meets a specific need that they have.
Well, here's how I think about Apple. They don't build well, they do build specific products. You can't deny that. However, that's not their main goal. At least to me, it doesn't seem to be. That their ultimate goal is to build an ecosystem. So you have a Mac, or you have an iPhone, or you have an iPad. Everything works together, and they all integrate with each other. That's what they're trying to do. Your Apple Watch talks directly to your iPhone. And I'm assuming, I don't have one. So from what I know, I'm going to say, yes, they connect. But they build this cohesive technological world, and they build things to allow other things to connect to it. And every time they enter a new, what we're calling a disruptive technology, whenever they're doing that, it's not, to them, it's not any different than what they have done in the past. It's still an integrated technology that builds on their current infrastructure. It's just a different way and a different sector of integrating with that central hub. To me, that's how I tend to look at it. So, yes, we can say that Apple somehow navigates disruptive technology, but their business is disruptive technology. So their entire supply chain and their entire product line is designed around a consistent world that is disruptive, but it's not disruptive within their own realm. It's only disrupted to the realm that they decide to interact with. The rumors about an Apple car. There's a good chance that the way that they tend to do things, that they're thinking about it outside the normal realm, kind of like what Tesla did. And, let's think about autonomous cars in a way that people haven't really thought about before. And that's how they come at it. I would assume Apple's going to do something similar, where they decide to enter a new realm, and it's disruptive to that realm, but it's not disruptive to them. To me, it seems like if you're going to have something that's disruptive to them, it has to come outside of them. Kind of like, well, was it yesterday, the Made by Google deal? As we're recording this, there were some things in that that may challenge Apple, in my view, and potentially disrupt them. So I think it's difficult. It's hard to get your head around it because Apple has this own weird way of making their entire business nothing but disruptive technology. And then once they introduce one that's disruptive, then they build off of it. But it's only disruptive to the outside sector, not to themselves. Does that make any sense? Is that completely off my rocker?
No, I think it makes sense. But what's interesting to me is, what does Apple do, or what does Google do when the services or the ecosystem that they're building is not the next big thing anymore? So Tim Cook recently made a comment about how virtual reality is interesting, but he doesn't think that it's really that important. Augmented reality is much more in line. I think, I forget exactly how he phrased it, but he basically said augmented reality was more in line with what Apple wanted to do in the future. So there's an opportunity, I guess, if virtual reality really did become the next big thing where Apple could miss it. The car thing is another example, but I kind of think that based off of the rumors that are floating around, it's kind of interesting to see how Apple's navigating that as well, because in the book, he actually talks about, the last chapter is the electric cars case study, but he talks about how it's really not going to be any time in the near future because they can't meet the basic needs of the consumer. And that's obviously changed a lot in the last 15 years. We can kind of see that now Tesla is meeting those specific needs, and there is actually demand for some of these things. It's going to be really interesting to see where that goes in the next couple of years. But he also says that the very attributes that make disruptive technologies uncompetitive in mainstream markets actually count as positive attributes in their emerging value network. As this applies to an Apple car, I think this is really interesting because there's been a lot of rumors recently about how they've kind of they've refocused the whole car initiative. And depending on who you listen to in terms of the rumors, they've pivoted. Again, all rumors, completely speculative. So please don't take this with a grain of salt. But the rumor has it that they were focusing on building an electric car, and now they are more interested in a service, kind of like an Uber type service, or maybe they're developing the cars that a service like Uber would typically use. That I could see being a really interesting example of how we were looking at this through our old value network. We're building this ecosystem for an individual who buys all of our products. And in that particular instance, a really, really expensive Apple car, because Apple stuff is always really, really expensive, maybe fails, because it doesn't provide enough value over the traditional gasoline cars or even Tesla. I mean, I have no idea what price point Apple could make an electric car available at. But when you think about it through this emerging value network, whether it's Apple or whether it's Tesla, whoever it is, like, there's been a lot of rumors about how different services, different companies are doing research on this whole like automated fleet. I think there is definitely a place in our future where you call a car, a driverless car picks you up, takes you where you want to go, and then drives away, and then is just on call until the next person calls it. And if that car is an electric car, how much more sustainable is that sort of company?
Yes, but at the same time, I really, really like an old 72 Chevy with like a 350 big block in it. Like, come on.
Right, but this really comes back to like the buying hierarchy that he outlines, where like you start off functionality. Does this electric car, does this service provide the same functionality that your 72 Chevy does? And then does it provide the same in terms of reliability? Does it provide the same in terms of convenience? If you are the same on all of those levels, then what's left is to differentiate based on price. And I think it's too early in that particular market to say that these are functionally equivalent. And who knows how close we are to being functionally equivalent there. I think there's probably a lot of work that needs to be done there. And there's also a lot of public what's the word? There's a lot of public image about the danger of a driverless car, especially when stuff like I mean, I would never do this, okay? But there was that news story about the guy who was watching Harry Potter on his iPad and his Tesla drove underneath a semi and
Oh,
obviously
right.
he died.
Right.
Well, I mean, idiots like that, where you like completely take your eyes off the road when you know that this technology is new, like that is going to leave a very negative, very bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. That's going to definitely influence public opinion in this particular area. And it's going to be hard for automated, I don't know what the term is. I'm talking about stuff I don't really understand, I guess. But the driverless cars, it's going to be hard for them to overcome that public opinion.
The autonomous cars. Is that what you're trying to say?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds better.
But see, at the same time, okay, so I come from agriculture, and we have had self-driving tractors for well over a decade at this point. And they are far from driverless, but you can sit down in a tractor today, and you've been able to do this for a long time, and turn on the computer and, set what we call an A/B line, go set a point on one side of the field, drive to the other side, set another point, and then hit go, and it will drive you, back and forth, and it'll follow that line. And it can get way more sophisticated than that. But I can tell you that driving those, running a planter, running whatever, if you run those for an hour, so not long, in the scheme of running a planter, because you can run it, 16 hours a day, or in some cases 18 hours a day every day for, 4 or 5 weeks in a row, you do that enough, and you just don't pay attention. You wait for the alarm to go off when you get to the other end of the field. You pick up the planter, you spin it around, and you go back and you do it again. And I know some guys who take naps while they're planting. The fields are long enough. They go around, they hit their button, and then they take a nap until they get to the other end of the field, and it sets off the alarm, and they do it again. Well, what happens if that thing loses a signal? Anymore it'll set off an alarm, but they didn't used to. And if you want to have an interesting bout on Google or even on YouTube, just type in auto steer gone wrong. You will see when these things have either shut off or wouldn't turn off. There are all kinds of scenarios when this stuff happens. And it's only when you get... that stuff only really happens when you get so comfortable with it that you just stop paying attention. And I think it's, something like a Tesla or an autonomous car, part of the issue and part of the public opinion and issues that they're going to have to overcome with that is that like in today's world, if you have an accident, it's somebody's fault. Somebody made a mistake. It's an error in judgment in some form. With an autonomous car, if everybody's in an autonomous car and there's an accident, that's a hardware or software issue. That's not a person's mistake. That is in this case, a robot's mistake. So who do you get upset about? If there's an accident, you get upset at the person who caused it. If a robot wrecks a car and kills somebody, what do you do about it? What are the ramifications of that? Now we're going down a rabbit trail here, but
who do you blame?
Yeah. We like to blame people. Look at how easy it is to have people get offended right now. We like to blame people and say it's someone else's fault. And if you have something like a driverless car that an accident is going to happen within, who do you blame for it? What do you do about it? And that's some of the public opinion that's going to be challenged through that. That's a lot of the outcry that's come from that Tesla accident. Even though, if you look at miles driven versus accidents that happen, the Tesla car is within what I'll call it auto steer. There's a name for it. I can't tell you what it is. But if you're in a car and if you're in a Tesla and it's driving on its own, it's actually safer than if you were driving on, if you were using your own judgment to drive that car. It is safer, and it's tough to argue that. But what do you do when it makes a mistake? It's not going to be perfect.
Right. And that's where obviously what the customer wants comes into play. And that was a really interesting section of the book where he talked about discoveries come from watching people use your product. he had an example in there with the Honda motorbikes. I forget what the name of it was. I think it was
Super
the Super Cub.
Cub. Yep.
Yeah, where they brought these over to
I'm a
the
redneck at
U.S.
heart, so
They brought these over and they were trying to sell them against Harleys, basically, and nobody would buy them.
well,
And then,
it wasn't the Super Cub that they brought over. It was they had I forget what it was, but they had an actual. It was a bigger bike designed to compete
correct.
with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the customers didn't want or didn't trust the Honda bikes though, and so the frustrated three people who came over and were living in California brought their Super Cubs up to the mountains, I think, and we're driving around. People are like, hey, that's pretty cool. Where can I get one of those? Because it was a recreational thing. It wasn't a transportation vehicle so much. It was more entertainment or fun. And they created a market there, which they never could have guessed. And I think that's a really important distinction. He talks about plans to learn versus plans to execute. Big firms, at least in the book, from what he was saying, they have a plan to execute based on meeting the needs of their specific customers. And he used example after example of that. The steel industry was another example where he talked about how people didn't want this lower quality steel. There were some customers who were okay with the real low, real thin sheet metal. And I don't remember the specific terms that he was using there, but there was basically really thin sheet metal that only a few specific use cases for it were existed. And the entrants into the market were okay making this type of metal because it was okay if it had a bunch of impurities in it.
Oh, you're talking about rebar.
Yes.
So rebar is it?
I don't know.
So farm kid, I researched this stuff. Okay, so anyway, rebar is at the bottom of the market because no one cares what's in it. Top level of steel industry is going to be sheet metal because it has to be extremely smooth and pure. So, and then you got all the stuff in between. So the entrants were interested in the rebar world.
Correct. Yeah. And
there
then so they entered in the rebar world. And then from there, they improved their process as they saw other adjacent market segments, I guess, other places where they could sell what they had. And that led to them refining the process until eventually they had a product that competed with the really, really pure sheet metal that the premium firms were so focused on. And then at that point, a lot of those firms went out of business because at that point where the firms that entered at the rebar part of that market, they had learned the ability to produce this higher quality metal, but they could do it cheaper. And so I think that there's a lot of markets that can be discovered that way, where you enter in almost below the market that currently exists, and then you just kind of try some things, figure some things out. Maybe you've only got like one or two places where this really is a fit, but then from there you can find a much wider market kind of through trial and error.
This comes back to the general premise of fail fast. How
Yep.
many times do we hear about, the best way to build a great business is to iterate and get through your failures quicker. And this is one of the things that Clayton brings up a few times with managers at bigger corporations, because they just don't want to take the risk. They don't want to risk having a failure on their record because it's going to hurt their career. I've seen that firsthand.
Exactly.
Like, I don't want to take a chance on something because there's a good chance it's going to hurt me it's going to keep me from getting a promotion that I'm after. So I don't want that ding on my record. And if you're in a company like that and you want to take a risk on something, you're not going to do it because there's a chance it's going to drop off and then you've got more issues on your hands. So you have to be okay with failure. The nice thing is that, between you with agent efficiency and a lot of what I do, like if I pick up a new technology, turn it into a business and it fails, big whoop, we'll scrap it and go on to the next one. Like, that's just the way we do things. And it's kind of the same with a lot of clients, even with websites. Sometimes I have to build 2 or 3 different versions of a website before we can get the right one. Now, granted, it's expensive for them to do that, but it's it's the process of, okay, let's get the things out there that we think might be a good idea. we're not real sure, but we're going to give it a try and see how it pans out. So I think there's a lot of value. You see this all over the place. Fail fast. If you get through your failures quicker, the sooner you get to your successes. You have to be okay with that in order to hit on one of these disruptive technologies. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. So it's
Yeah.
a challenge.
Yeah, one of the cool strategies for doing that, which I really liked in the book, was the HP model, where
Oh, right.
it said that the HP had developed laser printers, which from a technological standpoint, laser printers are way, way, way better than inkjet printers. They can print faster, they can print more precise, or at least when he wrote the book anyways. I got to admit, I haven't followed the printer industry.
I have no idea. I don't even own a
years.
printer.
But he said that HP created a separate company to develop the inkjet printers, and they competed against the company that developed the laser printers. And what they found was that while the inkjet printers were not as good as the laser printers, they could create them much more efficiently, much more cost effectively. And so there was a large demand in a consumer market that didn't really care that it wasn't as good as the laser printers because it was good enough. And he has a quote there, which I really, really liked. He said, 2 models for how to make money cannot peacefully coexist within a single organization. I completely understand that. In the family business that I was involved in for quite a while, there was we went through a transition where we transitioned from software that you would install on a network to an online HTML5 CSS model built on Ruby on Rails. So very technical. Basically, all you need to know is that we made a leap when all of this stuff about Flash was going on. Steve Jobs wrote the letter about how we're never going to allow Flash on our iPads, like while we were in the middle of this development project. And I was a big advocate for, well, we can't do Flash. We have to do HTML5, CSS, Ruby on Rails, because this is the future. Everything is going to support this. Not everything is going to support Flash.
Right.
And we guessed right. But at the time, we were in a precarious spot because we were investing a lot into research and development, but we also had to keep the lights on. So we were selling software at the same time. And then for a while, we had the software still available. We had a lot of customers in the education industry in particular that are not early adopters who wanted the old software, but we knew that the online stuff was going to be the future. So it was an awkward position for a while because it's like, well, we know this is the future, but we got to support both of these. And usually when you went into a sales presentation saying, now you can pick either one of these, you didn't get that sale.
Yes.
And as a company, as an organization, I feel personally that if we had gone all in on the online technology the moment that it was available to the public, we could have established a much stronger position, market position as an industry leader in this new technology, which obviously now everything is web-based. So I kind of look at it as somewhat of a missed opportunity. I mean, we did all right. We navigated it fine, but there's still that question in the back of my head, what if?
Yep. Yeah, I run into the question of, do I build a website or do I build an app? I get that question a lot because I can do both. Like I'm one of those utility developers, and I run across a lot of cases where we're going to build a website together. Awesome. Can we build an app too? Well, if you want to, yeah, absolutely. I have no idea what it's going to get you outside of it's cool, but the only thing that it really seems to give people in this particular case is push notifications. Like that's really the one thing that an app is going to get you that a website won't. Like that's just how I have those conversations. And the cost to build an app versus the cost to build a website is drastically different. So
Yep.
Most of the time, I think every time except one, I've had people just stick to the website because it's so much easier to develop for all applications as opposed to trying to do native stuff. So I get it.
Correct. But if you think about, I mean, that's a great example because that's also kind of recent history. When the iPhone first launched, Steve Jobs said, you don't need apps. You can
Yeah.
install web apps basically. And obviously, Apple's made a ton of money off of the App Store. That's one of the things that they've done well. So they've had to pivot there. Facebook also, when the app craze was just starting for, I don't even know how long it was. I think it was like 2 years. They did not have a mobile application. They said, just use the mobile web page. It's fine. And technically, they were right, but that's not the experience that the customer was looking for. And
Right.
again, it's colored through the lens that you present it. I mean, they could have done surveys with people. They came to Facebook. They watched them use the web view after they had loaded it on the mobile device for them already, and they could see that they could navigate everything cleanly. Didn't have any issues, and so they look at that data and they say, "Oh, well, we don't need a mobile application." But again, they pivoted, and now Facebook is kind of famously done very, very well on mobile as they've embraced that platform, and also at the same time, because they've put an increased emphasis on it, kind of figured out the formula for monetizing mobile. I think if you were to do a case study on mobile applications and monetization, Facebook's got to be one of those companies that you study, because they've done pretty well at it, whether
Yeah.
you like their methods or not.
Right. But you also have to keep in mind that they stepped into the app world whenever notifications started to be a thing. So
That's true.
they, because of push notifications, that's what made their app so much more applicable than just the website. Because the website doesn't let you push things to the phone, but the app will. So almost every case, so you're stepping into my wheelhouse here, Mike. So almost every single time, there are very few exceptions, but the only times that I've run across that are successful where the app has the ability to trump what the website does are cases when you need to collect information and you're not going to be on a data connection. Like you're going to be somewhere offline. So you have to be able to interact with things that are sitting on the phone. That's one case scenario. The other is when you're pushing things to the phone from an external cloud service of some kind. If you're not doing one of those two things, the chances of an app being worthwhile are pretty slim. Like it just
Yep.
doesn't seem to give you a whole lot. If it's a thing where you're going to go check it to see the new stuff and you don't have a need to push things to the phone, or you're always going to have a data connection, to me, websites are the way to go. They're a lot easier to develop, and it has a lot more flexibility and a lot. So anyway, you're gonna get me on a little soapbox here, but anyway, so let's step into action items here. I have one, and it's not anything major. It's just kind of this is good to know, but I have a lot of criteria that I go through when I evaluate new technologies that I'm looking for to turn into businesses. And whenever I do that, I can see where understanding what can qualify as a disruptive tech, because ultimately that's what I want to find. If I'm looking at the railroad industry and I run across something that I feel like is going to completely change the way that their trains communicate with the railroad crossings, if I run across something like that, then I know that I've got something that's a great opportunity as a business there. But to me, this has given me a lot of criteria to help find these things, to find whatever the new stuff is, and to help figure out what's the best one to turn into a new business. So I don't think I'm going to be able to say this went really well. It's just another thing that adds to my way of understanding what to look for. So you can ask me how it went next time, but I'm probably not going to have much of an answer.
Right. Well, I mean, this does read like a textbook.
Yeah, it
and
does.
I don't know. I feel like, having recorded the episode, this is your final exam. So now it's just try to retain
Yeah.
as much of this stuff as you can when it's applicable. I think the stories and the examples are really what stood out to me. The action items that I wrote down, and again, like we're just finishing up the development for the email course. So like I could definitely see the positive benefits of listening to your users, and not just your users, but the people who are connected to your potential or your current customer, because the next big thing may not fit into the box that you have created to serve your current customers. So really just listening to what people in general are saying, and then also to keep learning, to keep looking for the next new thing, and to keep, it comes back to listening, but looking at what you're hearing and then figuring out where the trends are. So one of the things that I think is key to Apple being able to navigate this stuff successfully in the recent past, and then we'll see how well they do in the near future, is one of the things that Steve Jobs said was stay hungry, stay foolish. And actually, as we record this today, I believe is it the 5-year anniversary of his death?
I think it was, yes. Was it this morning? Yeah, I think it was today. Yeah, as we're recording this.
So I heard on one of the podcasts that I subscribed to, at the end, they replayed his address to Stanford University, where he talks about, he's got 3 different lessons that he tells them. It's really good. If you haven't listened to it, you should definitely check it out. Because at that point he had successfully dealt with 1 round of cancer. And then obviously we know that he eventually died from it. But at the end of that speech, he kind of talks about how it's kind of somber and not really morbid, but he really just instills, remember, this is a college graduation. He's like, remember that you're going to die someday. And he talks about how, like, if you view every day through that lens and you ask yourself, if do I want to do what I am about to do today? And if you say no too many days in a row, like, go find something else. But really, he talks about his story, his journey, like how he was able to drop out of college and attend a calligraphy class, and how that influenced the font design on the original Macintosh. Like, he did a really good job of having an open learning mindset. That's the thing I really want to take away, is I think the people who can successfully navigate innovations and disruptive technologies are the people who are constantly learning. They're constantly looking to make not just a better product, but a better version of themselves. So it's coming back to the why that we talked about at the very beginning. Like, their why is, I want to do the right thing, not just the thing that has met the needs of my customers up until this point, but constantly looking for a better way to do things. And so I want to embrace that mindset, not just professionally, but also personally.
Which is where Bookworm comes in, because we read a ton.
Exactly.
So it's one thing that, and I tell people, I have another course I did working with ideas, and in that course we talk about how do you go about continually bringing in new information into your mind so that you can come up with new ideas. How can you come up with this disruptive technology? How can you develop that process in your mind? And the number one way is continually bring in new information into your mind. Always be learning. So there you go. If you continue bringing in that new information, the more chances you have to come up with a new, innovative, and disruptive idea. Now, author's style, this was tough. This is a hard read. And
yes, it was.
This, outside of maybe some high-level executives, I don't think I'll ever recommend this book. Like, this is just one that I think it's interesting to have read, but it's very technical and difficult I would say it's very difficult for most people to just pick up and stick with it, especially since he starts off with the hard part. He starts off with that disk drive piece. So if you don't have an interest in disk drives or the history of the technical components that are inside of mainframes and mini computers, if you don't have an interest in that, this is going to be a challenge. So it's a big ding on it, in my opinion. So it's a tough one.
You can tell that if you can make it through the disk drive part.
Yeah.
You can tell that Clayton Christensen is a very brilliant business thinker. But all you need to know is you look at the cover and you see that it is published by Harvard Business Review Press. So if that excites you, read the book. If it does not excite you, stay away. Because it definitely did feel like I was back in business school. Like I said, I almost gave up before we left the disk drive section. I was really concerned because, confession, I did this in college too. The professors that did not engage me, I found myself reading the material and just going through the pages and not getting anything from it. Nothing was clicking.
Right.
That's how this book started for me. And I was really worried that we were going to get on the mic and talk for an hour about stuff that just went in one ear and out the other. But that's not how it ended up. Okay. So I actually did get quite a bit out of this book. I am glad that I read it. but it would definitely be hard for me to recommend this one to the general public, like you said. But if you really like Harvard Business Review, I know several people that do subscribe to that. Like, I think it's definitely a good book, and Clayton Christensen's a brilliant guy.
So how would you rate this, taking all that into account?
I was hoping you would go first.
I can go first if you want.
I'm going to give it a 3.5, I think. Like I said, there's definitely a lot of really good content in here, but for the average bookworm listener, I don't think that this is going to be appropriate. Where if you're going to pick a book to read, there are other books on our list that I would read first.
Yeah.
But for the right person at the right time, this book could be amazing. So yeah, I'm going to say 3.5.
I was going to give it a 3.0. So I enjoyed understanding the concepts. It was helpful to see the difference and differentiate between sustaining tech and disruptive tech, but the methods through which we got there, extremely painful, in my opinion. Okay. So I'll put it at 3 because the concepts are extremely helpful. That's probably the only thing keeping me off of a 2 or a 2.5 is because the concepts are so helpful, but it's just, yeah, it's very heady, I would say. You really have to think, and this is not one. Some of these books that we read, and there's one that's on our upcoming list here shortly that, they're pretty short, they're pretty easy to read, they're very easygoing, and I can sit down and read them, at night before bed, and I'm fine. This thing, I had to do it first thing in the morning when my mind was on full alert, because there was no way I was going to pull off reading this right before bed. It'd be great bedtime material to help me fall asleep, but it was a challenge. So I'm going to put it at a 3.
I actually did fall asleep at one point reading
awesome.
This book. I made that mistake at the beginning because that's usually when I read books is at night before I go to bed. And that first chapter started reading, it was about 9:30 and fell asleep on the couch.
Awesome. So Amber and team, when you guys are picking books for your family to read, skip this one.
Right. But if you are in business school and this stuff really floats your boat, then check it out.
Yeah, I would say if you're in business school, it's probably a must read, which is there. I don't know very many people that really thoroughly enjoy the deeper level stuff within business school, though. I just don't. Most people just try to understand the high level concepts of it, but the deeper stuff tends to just be forgotten. Just my opinion.
No, you're probably right. I definitely am a little bit of an oddball in that respect. I guess that some of this stuff I really, really do get excited about. There were definitely parts in this book where he's talking about the different examples, like the HP example, and I was like, "Oh, that is awesome! That's a great idea," But they were kind of few and far between for the average reader, I would say.
Yeah, that HP thing was like a 5-page excerpt out of 260. So there you go.
Yep.
So Innovator's Dilemma was my choice. What'd you pick for after that?
The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey, which I've started on this one, and it's way different than the Innovator's Dilemma. So this will be a fun one.
Okay. And then I have a short one for following that. So I picked this one for a couple reasons, and I'll go into it again when we get there, but it's Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. So we go through all these books in 2 weeks, and for a lot of people, it's tough to get through it in 2 weeks because a lot of them are around 200 pages. And this one, I just grabbed it, is 55. So this one's 55 pages, very small pages, very large print. You will sit down and read this one in one sitting, easy, I think. So if you're wanting to get into the bookworm cycle, this would be a good one to jump in on. So that one would be Following the Productivity Project. So if you're wanting to get started on following along with this would be a good one to do it with.
Sweet. Yeah, and if you want to recommend a book, you can actually do that on the Bookworm website, which is bookworm.fm. And on the right-hand side, there's a sidebar where there's a button you can recommend a book. And if you click on that, there's a form, but there is a list of the upcoming books on here. Also, there's a book list. So if you want to see what we have done, and also what is planned and what other people have recommended, you can go to bookworm.fm/list.
Cool. And as we have mentioned just about every episode now, if you wouldn't mind, leave us an iTunes review. I think it's interesting to see what people, we were talking about this at the very beginning. Like, what do you think about the show? And like Amber did, she sent us an email to let us know her opinion and how it's affected her. But another great way to do that is with an iTunes review, because then you can give that feedback, but it also serves a secondary role in helping other people find us. And we're always looking to have a bigger impact. So if you wouldn't mind, go over to iTunes. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you. And just go over there and leave us a review.
Yeah, that would be awesome. We really do enjoy hearing from people who are getting a lot out of the show, and leaving an iTunes review is definitely a way that other people can find the show. So iTunes has a funky algorithm that they use to feature different podcasts, and one of the things they look at is the number of reviews, and then also how recent the reviews are. So if you could do that, that would be great. And really appreciate everybody listening. We'll catch you next time.